So now let's talk about SOA, or service-oriented architecture. So we've talked about client-server architecture, where you have client computers connecting directly to a server. Basically, you own and you're responsible for the server, and generally you own and you're responsible for the clients. Well, the thing is, that's how we were doing things, again, 25 years ago when I got my MCSE. Whenever you built out your network, whenever you built out your architecture, you had your servers, you had your client computers, and you had them communicating. Well, as things went along, basically what geeks realized is they could create entire platforms and then simply rent out services to those platforms to whoever needed the particular service. Why should you have to spin up a full-fledged email server so that your code has email services when you can simply buy email service from a company like SendGrid? So SendGrid is a service that allows you to send and receive emails through your code using what is called an API call. So at this point, now all you're doing is you're simply connecting to their servers to basically get whatever resources that you need, and then you're simply paying for whatever service it is that you use. The good part about this is you don't worry about the operating system. You don't worry about the antivirus. You don't worry about configuration files. You don't worry about the CPU fan burning out, right? You just do your little API call to their service, and that's all that's required. So if we diagram this out, again, before with client-server architecture, you had your client systems, you had your servers. Generally, it was all within one facility. You own all of these systems, and they're communicating with each other. You might have something up on the cloud, again, something like a VPS or some type of server that's up on the cloud. Your client computers can connect to the server that's up there, but the idea is you are controlling and responsible for that server, and you're basically responsible for all of this. What we start looking at, though, is that's a tedious way to do things, right? That means your Python coder also needs to understand how to run an email server, or an SMS server, a file server, or all that kind of stuff. If your coder doesn't know how to do it, you need to hire people. Hire people at $100,000 a year to be able to deal with that kind of stuff, and that gets to be expensive. So the idea is, what if you have a box? Basically, you have a server, right? You install Linux on the server, and again, we're going to be using Python. So in Silicon Dojo, we use Python as our language. And what if we want things like email services, and we want SMS services, and maybe we want things like file services, right? Well, instead of building our own boxes and being responsible for this, what if our Python code can just go up to the cloud, and again, for email, it can use a service from SendGrid, right? So it uses something called an API call, Application Programming Interface Call. So Python communicates with the SendGrid server and says, hey, I want you to send this email out. And then SendGrid is responsible for sending that email out, and you get charged 0.001 cent every time you do that, right? If you want to send out an SMS message, so basically you want somebody's phone to get a message, again, you can send up, and there's a service called Twilio. Again, you make an API call, you give the sender's basically phone number, you get the receiver's phone number, and you get the message. So you send this all within your Python code up to Twilio, and then that will go out to the person who has that telephone, and they will get your SMS message. Again, with file, so there's like Box. So Box is a platform that's up there. Again, if you're going to be storing files, or if you're going to be retrieving files, you can also do that through an API call. And so you might use the Box service. And again, the good part about this is you're simply paying for however much storage you're using on the system, plus however much bandwidth you're using. So instead of having to spend $5,000 to come up with your own storage system, you can just simply connect Box to your Python. Again, Twilio to Python, SendGrid to Python, and now all of these are just services. Again, that's what we talk about, service-oriented architecture, and they're not something that you're fully responsible for. Now, not only is service-oriented architecture good because you're not responsible for the systems themselves, but it also makes it a lot easier to swap out different vendors if you need to, right? So back with client-server architecture, if you had Outlook email clients and you had an Exchange server, if you decided to go with a different email server, that was a tedious, nasty, horrible migration nobody wanted to go with, right? Basically, that's the whole thing with legacy. Like something got installed 20 years ago and you keep using it because nobody wants to go through the migration process. The cool thing now with service-oriented architecture is basically you only have a few lines of code that connects the program that you've created, the code that you created to whatever service, right? So if you need to send a Twilio message, you need to send an SMS message through Twilio, you'll use 5 lines of code. Again, the sender's phone number, the receiver's phone number, the message that you want to send, and some additional information to connect with Twilio. The cool part about that is if at some point you decide that Twilio is not the SMS service that you want to use, you can simply rip out that 5 lines of code and add whatever code is required for somebody else's service. Think about this right now with artificial intelligence, right? There's a lot of different AI services out there. There's OpenAI, there's Google's Gemini, there's just Claude, Anthropic, there's lots of them, right? So let's say you design a system and you have AI integrated into the code that you've created, again, under this service-oriented architecture. So you're using OpenAI. So you're using OpenAI, everything's fine. And then let's say at some point they change the pricing model, right? The pricing for OpenAI goes up, or maybe the performance goes down. Right now in my timeline, the performance got a little weird for some reason. So let's say it's not giving you the performance that you want, and so you're going to go over and use Claude, something like that. Well, the cool part with service-oriented architecture is all you do is you create an account with Claude, you get the API credentials and the rest of that, you add that to your code, you rip out the OpenAI code that you have in there, and now you're using Claude. Basically, that's all you have to do. You don't have to buy another physical box. You don't have to spin up another virtual machine. You don't have to go through a migration process. You just simply swap out a few lines of code, and now you're using a different vendor's service, and it's literally about that easy. So that's one of the reasons that service-oriented architecture is so useful too. So that's the idea behind service-oriented architecture, and here at Silicon Dojo, that's mainly going to be the architecture style that we're going to use for a lot of our projects, right? So our projects are going to be small enough, I don't want you having to go out and build a whole bunch of servers to make the projects work, and so again, using somebody else's services just makes life a lot easier, and it's something that's very easy for teaching people how to use, again, in a very inexpensive fashion. Whether service-oriented architecture is right for the actual project that you're going to be deploying, again, is something that you're going to have to figure out. But many times in the modern world, it's probably the right way to go.